Today I am talking with Sophie Shand. Sophie is a holistic health coach. She's got over 30 years of experience working in the field of nutrition. She has a background in traditional Chinese medicine and Western naturopathy. I think I've said that right. And one of the things she talks about is the privilege that she has had with training with some of her teachers and her respect for them and for the wisdom that they've shared with her really comes through in the way that she writes about it. And I'm sure it will come through in the way that she talks about it with us today too. She is deeply fascinated in how the work that she does can support women going through menopause. And she actually reached out to me following some of the meditations and talks that I've shared on Insight Timer over the last couple of years, all to do with menopause. And she recognised the connection with the areas that I'm interested with and the areas that she's interested in too. So today we're going to be having a chat about how to create balance during menopause. Now, you'll know from listening to the podcast that this is something I'm deeply interested in. It's something that I work with a lot of clients who are going through menopause, either like in those early stages of perimenopause or right in the heart of where the symptoms are really, really impacting them across the whole of their life, at work, etc. But I also do a lot of work with women who are at the postmenopausal stage, which is where I'm at, where we're at a stage in our life and we're trying to make sense of what comes next, coming into this time that the Chinese so beautifully call our second spring. So I'm going to be chatting with Sophie around the hormonal imbalances that we experience during menopause and how that our response to those imbalances, or even how those imbalances themselves can be influenced by the rhythms around us. And I'm really curious to listen to her observations of our connection with that natural world. And like I said, she's a holistic health coach, so really looking, at the kind of the biggest possible picture. And even if menopause isn't something which is part of your life, or part of your life right now, then I'm sure there's going to be a huge amount that Sophie can share with us, which will be resonant across the whole of our life. She also has a deep interest in our spiritual and psychological balance, and that's something that I am very, very interested in as well, outside of menopause and during menopause. And I'm curious about how she brings in those nutritional needs of the body, as with this very holistic approach. And obviously this idea of balance is something that I talked to the gorgeous Susan McCulley about in season 6, episode 9, where we talked about how balance is a verb, not a noun. It's something that we endlessly create. It's something that we do, not something that we reach and then become static once we get there. So I'm sure that this sense of this endlessly adjusting to our environment, to our nutritional needs, to our hormonal needs, and to the rhythms of the world around us is something that's going to come through as a really rich theme when I speak with Sophie in a moment. So I'm just waiting for her to arrive, and I'll pause recording and then see you in a moment when she's here. So wonderful to meet you, Sophie, and to see you here, and thank you. And also, just so everyone knows, we've just been having some very joyful tech challenges with our mics and trying to make sure that everything is, the sound levels are right. So hopefully, as you listen to us, it all sounds beautiful. So, Sophie, I would love just to hear and for you to share a little bit of what you shared in your message to me, and kind of what brought you to this work, this very holistic approach that you have, and just to kind of introduce yourself in that way would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'd be delighted. Hello. So I was introduced at a very young age to a very alternative approach to health. My father, he was an older dad. He was in his 50s when he had his second set of children. And he developed some sinus problems, some gout and all sorts of things. And he went to see a naturopath and she said, no more fry-ups. And, and he just launched himself into this interest in health. And so we were brought up in a very sort of alternative way with carrot juice and muesli, which my friends would come round and they'd call it horse food. And so it was just, a real desire. My mother jumped onto the bandwagon. I mean, she was brought up by two ballet dancers in Denmark with a sweet shop and chocolate every night under her pillow. So this was just a huge thing for her to suddenly be making carrot juice, and she embraced it absolutely fully. So that's kind of how it started. But my childhood wasn't particularly easy, as it isn't easy for many, just in terms of my parents getting divorced and various things that happened and difficulties. And so as a teenager, I became very emotionally aware and really went on to a path of wanting to kind of heal myself, I suppose, in a sense. That there was more to life than sort of just going out and making a crust. I needed to heal some wounds there, and my relationship with my mother was very tricky. I mean, she was quite critical and domineering, and as a teenager, I rebelled, put the DMs on, and she was always so glamorous and beautiful and beautifully dressed, and she would look at me, and so I was both interested always in the emotional and the physical health elements, and I was very lucky to train with this incredible woman called Barbara Wren, who's now in her 80s, who developed her own philosophy of health, which is a mixture of naturopathy, nutrition, and this incredible sort of holistic approach, shall we put it that way. It just was extraordinary, the way she connected the universe, the universal rhythms, our spirituality, the proper holistic approach. So she introduced us to traditional Chinese medicine. And traditional Chinese medicine is wonderful because it basically has a simple quote for it, which is, disease is the sum total of blocked emotion. And so for me, I was, yes, fascinated in sorting out the physical body, but I realized at a young age, which Barbara didn't focus on so much, but the emotional side. She alluded to it with the holistic approach, but she was always experimenting on the body with these fascinating approaches like urine therapy from India, coffee enemas from Western naturopathy, hot and cold therapies, which of course now we're all into sea swimming and things, And this was nearly 30 years ago. So I've been involved in this for many years. So it's wonderful to see people catching up with these ideas.
It's amazing. So, I mean, gosh, there's so much richness in what you've just shared. That growing up in an environment in the 70s, I think we're very close in age. So, growing up in the 70s in a household that was open to eating differently, and really willing to understand the connection between food and health, and obviously sort of how that will have influenced you, but also your awareness
in your teenage years that you needed to explore the things that were going to really, really support you. I mean, that self-awareness is quite astonishing at that age, because obviously what a lot of us do is we develop these very clever strategies to shield ourselves and put barriers up and carry beliefs, behaviours that we do in order to support ourselves, but it's not that deeper work that you're talking about. So how amazing that you found Barbara at a point, it sounds to me as I'm listening to you, you found Barbara at a point where she was really the person that you needed to learn from. I mean,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
gosh.
And it didn't stop me from just this awareness didn't stop me from having to go on a journey
Yeah.
and continue to go on a journey of deep inner kind of resolution within myself of a lot of patterns, conditioning that's come from my childhood and probably generational as well.
Mm.
Ending up in a marriage that ended a few years ago that was really um, represented the chaos of my childhood. I mean, the financial security was there in my childhood. The emotional security wasn't. I then launched hot foot into a relationship where we both were on the same path in terms of loving children, and we have 4 children together, and that was a wonderful part of it. But by goodness, the chaos in terms of the financial and emotional state. I was in survival mode for many, many years, while still doing this work and still practicing and still being a continual student of trying to understand myself and how to heal myself, but within this framework of craziness and not wanting my children to experience the lack of emotional support that I had, and wanting them to feel really good about themselves. But the danger was, and my mother noted it actually a few years ago, was it came from a place of wanting my children to love me, please love me. So my boundaries weren't always, they were okay, but they weren't always as strong as they needed to be. And so I could be taken on a bit of a ride.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it's a continual journey now. And coming into the perimenopause at the age of 46, oh my word, what a reckoning that was. Because I'd always tried to take care of myself pretty well. I've always had an incredibly sweet tooth. It's got much better, but I still have a tendency to want to find comfort in sweet food. It's never been alcohol, it's never really been other things, but sweet things. And all through my teenage years, particularly, and all through my 20s, I would struggle with consuming too much sugary stuff. And as a nutritionist, as a nutritional therapist, that was very tricky because you felt so bad that you were helping people sort their diet out, and then you were going home and sort of using the sugar to comfort yourself. So I had to do again a lot of introspective work and have some therapy and stuff to address that and come to a place of peace around that, and to be able to accept that I'm not perfect, and to start to let clients know and my audience know I am not perfect. I mean, I even did a blog, my double ice cream day. I had 2 ice creams in one day, and I thought I have to be real about this. But what's brilliant is I was able to then develop tools and techniques to really support my clients. So that I really appreciate that I was able to do that deep dive and start to really be able to help my clients, not just with the nutritional side, but really with the emotional side, to start to do that work. And I trained in life coaching, did a lot of inner child work, and this rewiring of the mindset, changing your mindset, changing your habits, and just went deep, deep, deep into that.
I think
That whole your point there around
the criticality of doing the work on ourselves, maybe in tandem with working with others,
always being really, really mindful
of how important it is that we do that work ourselves. And I think there's also there's a deep humanity to that. So when we work with teachers or guides or people that we learn from in any way, that we are able to see their humanity and be able to understand that they've also been on a journey and are continuing to be on a journey. It's interesting, actually. I did a piece yesterday where I talked about Richard Bach's quote of "We teach the thing that we most need to learn," and I see it again and again with other practitioners, where for me, my focus so often is compassion, is self-compassion, because I it's something that I have to continuously learn to show toward myself. And listening to you, that awareness of the kind of the holistic needs of our whole self sounds like something that's really sitting at the heart of what you do, and I suspect is how you support your clients as well.
Yeah.
You touched at the beginning, and with the work that you did with Barbara, you touched on this idea of how we're inextricably linked to the rhythms of the universe and to the rhythms of nature. And you also mentioned about the fact that you're perimenopausal yourself now. And I just wanted to understand, how does that kind of influence the way that you see menopause and the way that you see women can support themselves through menopause, with that awareness of the other
Yeah.
rhythms around it?
I mean, so what's interesting is these four life phases, and perimenopause being the third life phase, and this idea that going into the fourth life phase, the queen phase, the crone phase, is just that's it. It's a life of the rest of your life is osteoporosis or arthritis, hip replacements, and very low energy. And it's just so not true. And this idea that sometimes it's bandied about that we're supposed to die at the around the age of perimenopause, and that the thing for me that I really want to sort of shift the conversation, I want to shift with perimenopause, is the huge focus on this idea that you have no hormones left, and therefore you've got to pump yourself full of hormones to eke out the rest of your life. Otherwise, you're going to get osteoporosis and so on. And the way that I was taught by Barbara is that she took everything down to the cellular level, right down to the cell, and that the hormones are a level above that. Hormones are made from our cells. And so there are a certain number of ingredients that you need to produce your hormones. You need 30 prostaglandins, omega-3 and 6, the B vitamins, magnesium, zinc. Yes, you need a whole cacophony of beautiful, nutrients. But this idea that your ovaries shut down and that's it, I mean, I just couldn't bear it, so I had to start talking about this in a different way and to explain that we still continue to produce our female hormones. And in fact, I love it that John Gray from Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus has recently brought the science into it and explained that we can actually produce more female hormones depending on how we're thinking and feeling. And so because there's been such a shift in the way women are, and that in our 50s typically we're financially independent, we don't need to rely on a man to make money or whatever, that we can end up on our masculine side if we're working in a masculine type job. which requires assertiveness, confidence, power, toughness, etc., decision making, problem solving. And that if we come home, it's important that we come back to our female side, you know, stroking our pets, hugging our partner, cooking a delicious meal. And so we can actually manipulate our hormones by the way we think and feel. And to me, this is just so beautiful. It's like the biology of belief, Bruce Lipton, who discovered that the way that you think can influence your cells at a cellular level and how healthy they can be. And we know that with the placebo effect. We know it. We know we can take a tablet and it might be a placebo. It might have nothing in it and it can still affect us. So our mind is so incredible, isn't it, for that?
We also see it with, I mean, there's a sort of core recognition, I think, even within very very I was going to say traditional Western medicine, but like, you know, very classic Western medicine, that, you know, how the impact of stress on the body, and, you know, and that stress is a foundation of many illnesses that we experience. So that is a very, very clear representation of how what's going on in our head can affect what's going on in our body.
Yeah.
And I think what's so wonderful listening to you is how these ideas are becoming more and more mainstream. You know, more and more people are acknowledging the impact of things like, you mentioned sort of stroking your pet. You know, now it's, you know, it's not unusual to hear of somebody taking, you know, dogs into a hospital ward for people to stroke the dog in order to, or for children who've got sort of learning needs, complex learning needs, to spend time with horses. And, you know, so we understand that there is this connection between these behaviours. And I think what's really interesting listening to you is that the growing awareness of what the science is that actually proves the theory.
And yeah, and the thing that's really key, and again, Barbara talks about this so much, is that nutrition, your nutrition, is only a tiny piece of that jigsaw. And that is what is so important to me, is because, you know, a client might say, you know, I need to change my diet. I've got some really poor eating habits. I keep eating, it might be too much chocolate or too much junk food, or it might be too much alcohol. That's very common. And, you know, I need to stop eating it. I need you to give me a diet plan. But the thing is that unless we get underneath the reason why you're doing it, and what I love about Abraham Hicks, if you're into Abraham Hicks and Esther Hicks, you know, when she was channeling Abraham Hicks and talking about your habits, these unhealthy ones, there's always a positive reason. And it's such a relief for a client to hear that. You know, I'm not judging you. I mean, look at me. I love chocolate. You know, it makes me feel ecstatic sometimes. But what's the reason? Why? What? You know, what's it giving you when you have that chocolate or that alcohol or whatever it is? And eventually the client can typically say, well, it relaxes me or it gives me energy. And so then, okay, so what else makes you feel like that? And so once you start removing the judgment, and, you know, with you describing your podcast as the compassionate menopause, when we can get a hold of that inner critic, you know, of that inner voice that keeps saying we're bad and, you know, telling us off, and get onto a strict diet and do it this way and do it that way, it's so much more than that. You know, if you want a quick fix, then, you know, go do your 6-week diet plan. But for me, it doesn't work. For me, I'm about long-term sustainability. It's about getting underneath the reason why you feel the way you do. So that might be looking at inner child trauma, you know, what's happened to you in your past, feeling that in your body and releasing that. And then looking at the way you think and feel, following that, it changes the way you think and feel anyway, and just practicing every single day little steps that take you closer to this place of finally accepting and loving yourself. And then the dietary change is so easy. It's so easy because you're like, oh, okay, I had a load of chocolate yesterday. Why was that? You can just be curious. Okay, maybe my blood sugar was low. Maybe I got very dehydrated. And where the perimenopause comes in is that it becomes a massive highlighter. It highlights absolutely everything that doesn't serve you. All the habits that you've carried from childhood to try to cope, all the patterns, the emotional patterns, the people pleasing, or the creating the big walls around and not letting people in, not trusting anybody, whatever those patterns are. And perimenopause just brings it all to the surface to be dealt with. So if we just go in at the physical level, which is important in perimenopause, because every time you get a hormonal shift, it's bringing that toxic load up to the surface to be dealt with. Now, you can put hormones in if you feel you want to. I don't do hormones. I've been learning more about bioidentical hormones, and I'm not against a natural hormonal support, perhaps, if you want to do that. I'm not against anything. I mean, if my clients are on HRT and things, that's fine. You can work with all of this work, whatever you're doing. But it's about getting underneath that toxic load that's presenting, which has come from your past, all the times that you've abandoned yourself and shoved the chocolate in or whatever it is, and it builds up. And then the perimenopause, which is like the third phase of your menstrual cycle, it's like premenstrual phase. You're just basically in there all the time, feeling pretty dreadful at times. And so it's a real invitation to get back to the truth of who you are. And that is no mean feat if you're carrying 40 or 50 years worth of stuff. And not even that, you've got all your generation, all your stuff from your ancestral line coming through as well. I mean, this is a big deal.
It is a big deal. And I think sort of a couple of observations from what you've just shared. I think one being there is no quick fix. And like you, I definitely have a kind of trigger moment when I see an app or a practitioner promising, get rid of your perimenopausal belly in 6 weeks, for example, and it's such this approach, this desire that we so often have. It's a very human thing to look for what's the quick answer, because our brains they're always trying to find the fastest route through something. It's why we have habits, because it's a quick solution. Don't have to keep thinking about it, just do it. But this, just echoing what you're saying, that this work, and it's called work for a reason, because it does take effort and it does take time, but it doesn't have to be effortful. It can also be easeful to do this work, but it takes, the effort is around consistency and a willingness to actually turn toward those parts of us that really need the attention, maybe the parts that we have been carrying with us for the last kind of 40 years or whatever, or the ancestral stories that we've been carrying. And one of the things that I often talk about is that when we come into adolescence, I don't know if you've sort of heard me, I can't remember if I've shared this on any of the Instagram pieces that you listen to, but not Instagram, the Insight Timer pieces, but one of my sort of feelings is that as we come into adolescence, we're given this box, and then we're taught throughout our lives in a very, often this lesson comes from a very loving place, but we're taught to put everything into that box, which is too painful, too complicated, too time consuming, too difficult to deal with. And we shove it all in the box and we shut the lid and we barrel on through our life. Even if, as with your story, even if during that time we're still like gathering this incredible wisdom to ourselves, and we're still aware that this stuff is important for us to work on, we still keep shoving stuff into the box.
Yep.
And because we just don't have the capacity, maybe, or we feel we don't have the capacity to deal with it all at the time. And then we come into perimenopause and the stuff in the box just starts knocking. And my feeling is that you talked about sort of ancestral and legacy stuff that we carry with us, that, you know, often our mothers, our grandmothers, great grandmothers, and way, you know, back down the line, their only choice was to sit on the lid, was to stop the stuff getting out, because God forbid you were a Victorian woman who allowed everybody to see what was really going on inside you, because you'd have been locked up. You know, there are so many stories of women being incarcerated in, you know, mental asylums, as they were called then. And, you know, one theory is some of that was to do with menopause. So, you know, in this amazing opportunity that we have now as women today, we have this opportunity to open the lid really choicefully, really mindfully and compassionately, and say, okay, my darlings, who needs my attention? What is it that I need to do this work on? And I think there's something so beautiful about, you know, what you've talked about in terms of that, taking that very holistic approach and really understanding, well, there are some nutritional needs that I can address here that will help balance the way that my body feels. But then there's also the psychological, the spiritual, the connection with nature that can also really, really support us too. So yeah, it sounds to me, Sophie, like you and I come from have met each other at a very similar place.
Yeah.
You talked about John Gray, and do you know, so that whole Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, I remember when it first came out, and I remember being like, I never actually read it. I remember feeling at the time a bit sort of dismissive about it. So I'm really interested in reading his next book, Beyond Mars and Venus, because I think at the time that it came out, I was still in my shuttered state. And now I feel much more curious about, you know, what sat underneath the work that he was noticing when he first wrote that book. And you've talked about this idea of how women can create balance through their actions, and I'd really love to. It feels like a very practical thing, actually. That you know, our listeners can perhaps observe for themselves in terms of, well, how am I influencing my hormonal state, whether or not you're going through menopause or you're just, you know, sort of any other stage of your life, or you're someone who's not actually going to go through menopause at all, because it's not just women who listen. So yeah, I'd love to explore that a little bit more, your thoughts on that.
So I'll give you an example. Yesterday, at the moment, my beloved partner works away, and he's very, very busy. And usually he's checking in throughout the day. And yesterday, every so often, he's just too busy. But there's this little voice in my head every so often. Most of the time I'm fine, but every so often that gets anxious. Oh, you know, maybe he doesn't love me anymore, sort of vibe as the day goes on. And I think, where is he? And this is a wonderful invitation. And it's really triggered by the perimenopause, because the kind of anxiety I experienced in perimenopause is not something I experienced in years gone by. I mean, I had some very difficult situations in previous years with the children growing up with my ex-husband, and it never seemed to trigger this incredible anxiety. And what I've learned to do is to really surrender into it. And my reaction could be, to wait until he finally gets in touch, or get in touch myself, which I never do. I always allow him to get in touch, and to really use it as an invitation to go within and see, what is this really about, and how can I take care of myself? And even if the scenario was he didn't love me anymore, it doesn't matter, because I love myself. I fiercely love myself. I had a situation also with a friend recently who wasn't able to hold space for me as I was having a bit of a moment. And again, I could feel angry with her about that, or acknowledge that she's obviously not in the place to be able to hold space. And how can I fiercely love myself when I'm not really getting the support outside? And this is what I find the perimenopause is. When things aren't going right externally, it is an invitation to go within. And what I love about John Gray is the way he talks about the importance of cave time for a man. So when they've been at work all day, they come back, they need a minimum of 30 minutes if they're healthy for solitude, to come back and build their testosterone, come back to center. And then they'll help you bath the kids, make dinner and so on. But if you ask them at the wrong time, you'll probably get a pushback. And often we will resent that as women, and we'll say, well, why is he sitting watching TV or playing video games or pottering with fixing his motorbike or whatever? What about me? And John Gray invites you as the woman to go do the same for you. Now, it might not be possible if you've got small children to bathe, but if you're going through perimenopause, it might be that your children are teenagers and can sort of manage themselves a bit. But what about that? You know, what about saying, okay, the guy's gone and taken 30 minutes for himself or an hour. You know, what about me? Could I go have an essential oils bath, or phone a friend and have a good laugh, or play some music and dance, or something that reconnects me to myself? So for me, whenever I feel triggered that my partner isn't in touch, I will always go within and really nourish and nurture myself. And sure enough, when the evening came, what a beautiful exchange with my darling lover person, because there he was explaining and expressing how much he wanted to be in touch with me, but how he'd been away all day working, and how much he loved me and loved me just the same. This was from no prompt from me. This was not me coming from a place of, where have you been? I was loving myself all day. I was taking care of myself. I was making choices that were self-loving and self-caring. And the most difficult thing for me through this perimenopausal journey is surrender. There is a part of me that has learned, a large part of me, that no one's going to take care of me, and I have to take care of myself, financially, emotionally, physically, and so on. And I resent that sometimes. I want someone to come in, swoop in and take care of me. And I have to accept that that is the work I need to do, is to get underneath that and acknowledge I have everything I need and that I am taken care of. And the universe responds with this beautiful man at the end of the day, staring intently at the screen, saying, I just want you to know this. I love you and I care about you. And it was a validation of the work I'm doing, that I don't look outside of myself for that self-care, that validation. If it comes, that's wonderful. I'm not perfect. Sometimes it's not great. But that is the continual invitation that I work on throughout this perimenopause, is to surrender to the feelings, to acknowledge them, and to go within and to do less. Because when you're feeling that anxiety, when you're feeling that toxicity in your body, and you think, God, I need to do this and that, and I need to detox my diet and so on, there's such a rush to fix it and find solutions. And it's not to say that when I'm feeling toxic, which I certainly can, that I don't need to do something with my diet. I certainly do. I need to drink a lot more water. I need to get very still and quiet and create a diet that works for me in that day, that helps with that stillness, which is very hydrating, which is swollen, which has lots of vegetables and soups and broths and brown rice, which brings, actually physically helps my body come back to center. So that is for me, the biggest, hardest lesson I'm learning in this perimenopause, is how can I surrender and stop trying and efforting and forcing my body to do something it doesn't want to do, forcing my mind and my feelings back into that box, not allowing them and going into that scarcity mode of not enough. How can I do that work? And that, for me, this perimenopausal phase is the most profound experience I've ever had in my life, you know, in terms of what it's bringing up for me and where I want to go with it. You know, I want to be a queen. I'd love to say to my clients and my audience, I'm doing brilliantly and I've got this and I know what I'm doing. Sometimes I'm in there,
Well,
just like my clients.
That's part of surrender. That is part of surrender. You know, this, and I've just got to show you right above my computer. Yeah. So this whole idea of surrender, and Michael Singer's work. I've talked quite a lot about Michael Singer on the podcast before, but just in case anyone hasn't heard me mention his 2 books, The Untethered Soul is an astonishing piece of soul work. And then his second book is The Surrender Experiment, and it's his story of how he began surrendering in the early 70s, I think, actually. So kind of in alignment with your dad, kind of his awakening to the nutritional needs of the body. But yeah, surrender. And it is always the answer. It is always the answer to surrender in. You know, it's what, and when we see it in Buddhism, we see Eckhart Tolle talking about it. We see teachers like Tara Brach talk about it. You know, this just the acceptance, the allowing of the now, the allowing of the experience. And that, for me, is where the deep compassion comes in, where we're not in this place of tension and resistance against ourselves or against what our body is going through. So if it's a hormonal shift that's driving a particular response in our system, or it's a sort of thought process that's got itself caught in a bit of a loop that is then driving anxiety, is always to bring compassion to that part, because the part of you that was sitting at home thinking, but does he still love me? You know, that's a part that's just trying to love you, isn't it? You know, it's, oh, bless her, you know, she shared that story. It's like, gosh, like hands up. You know, if you've ever felt like that, it's just so human, and it's okay. I think that's the other thing here as well, is, you know, this idea of like how to create balance is to be okay about the fact that balance is something that we're endlessly adjusting to. I did a podcast at the end of season 6 with a lovely woman, Susan McCulley, and she's a physical practitioner, but a beautiful thinker, beautiful feeler, and she talks about how balance is a verb, not a noun. And I think this applies here as well, you know, just listening to everything that you're sharing around the natural rhythms around us, noticing what our needs are, recognizing that our nutritional needs one day might be different from another day. That's all about this endless adjustment and awareness and a willingness to love ourselves. But that I think is the hardest thing. You know, it took me a long time.
Yeah, just to emphasize to anybody who's listening, the resistance to it, because the way that we're brought up is we're taught that we've got to make things happen ourselves. And it's really interesting studying the human design system. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a combination of astrology and chakra and I Ching. And there are many of us who are generators and manifesting generators who are responders. We have a strategy of responding. What a relief to discover that. Oh my God, I don't have to make things happen. I just have to be in a receptive place and allow, and the inner prompt will come, or the external prompt will come, and I'll know what to do. What a relief. How frustrating to always feel like you've got to make things happen. And that's our patriarchal, very masculine way of doing things. And the invitation to the feminine, and going through perimenopause, if you're too much on your masculine side, how much are you going to disrupt if you're in a feminine body, in a female body? If you're always acting from the masculine, you're always in action mode rather than in receptive, creative mode. And it's the practice that I have to do every single day. And I regularly, the perimenopause is bringing it to such a big sort of place, because the resistance to this process, and I'm only really getting into it now, and it's been several years, of every month, my physical body taking me down, literally with a massive headache, a massive detox process goes on within my system about once a month, where I literally have to go to bed. And that is the resistance. So what I'm really working on now is how I can really listen. And when I talk about listen, I don't mean go about your normal day and then have a few moments of meditation. I mean, I don't mean stop what you're doing work-wise and your responsibilities, but it's much bigger. It's much, much bigger than we can even imagine. These patterns are so entrenched in us, this way of functioning, this pushing, this effortful, this scarcity mode is so entrenched. Certainly it's entrenched with me, that that's the work. That is the work.
And I think regardless of our gender, that those patterns are entrenched, and those that need to listen. And also, this we have one of the things that I definitely notice is this kind of wave that passes through our life, where we have a kind of a higher and lower levels of awareness, or almost like the barriers that we put up to that awareness become thinner or thicker depending upon where we are in our life. And perimenopause is a thin place, it's a place where, like, oh my God, we feel things so deeply, and we have this like incredible, like, supercharged power to like see like stuff too. And I think the same thing happens with men as well, sort of genetic, male, genetic, female, we both go through these same sort of phases in our lives. And something I talked about a lot with my husband, because we talk about menopause quite a lot in this house, and one of the things that he is acutely aware of and has been teaching me is the process that men go through. And I suspect that there will be a lot more work on the sort of concept of the male menopause, because these hormonal sort of shifts, they happen in men as well. It's at a slightly different age, but it still happens. And in the past, it was the joke about the man would go out and get a fast car and a younger model, but actually that comes from somewhere. That comes from an unrest. It comes from a sense of dissatisfaction. It comes from a sense of not enoughness, and we are, we've been taught to kind of ridicule that idea, and that doesn't help.
Absolutely.
Really doesn't help.
Remembering that the man's hormonal cycle is within 24 hours. So we have whatever, a 28-day or, thereabouts, don't we? It's spread out over a whole month. And so, the man's going to go through that in one day,
Yes.
And
let's just honor that as women listening here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, the woman's is spread out a lot longer and over a longer period of time. But yeah, no, there's a, you know, how can you support each other within that a relationship? You know, my brother's hilarious. I mean, he's 48 and he's suddenly decided, you know, he's selling his house with his wife in a 3 years time, and he's off around the world buying a boat and off around the world. That tells you something. You know, it is a desire for change. It is a shift. It is a prioritizing. I mean, he's letting go of this big, old, beautiful farmhouse. I'm not sure his wife's that keen, but you know, that stability where the children were brought up, and, you know, and he's willing to let all of that go and have a little flat somewhere and sail around the world. Wow.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, this conversation is not to minimize what men are going through. It's just that ours feels a bit noisier at times, shall we
Yeah,
say?
I think that's a really beautiful way of phrasing it. Actually, there is a lot of internal noise, and I think, you know, our experience, our learnt experience, our ancestrally learnt experience is that that noise was suppressed. And what we're seeing now externally is that that noise is coming out. And I think that is part of what's driving some of the stuff that you were talking about before around, you know, these kind of different camps that form, that, you know, HRT is the only answer. And if you don't take HRT, you're going to be limiting yourself in some way. And then the other camp, which is HRT is like the worst thing ever, and you must never put that stuff inside your body. And, you know, and it's like, oh, okay, sort of talking about balance, like there is always a middle way. Like, there is always. And my sort of overriding kind of thread that seems to be coming through this conversation is it's all about listening to ourselves on that very, very deep cellular, to quote Barbara, cellular level, like really listening.
Yeah. And can you give yourself the thing is, can you allow yourself? I mean, I thought it was interesting in your last podcast how you spoke about taking a step back. And I had a very profound conversation with my stepfather and mother. He happens to be a great sort of counselor, being a Libra. He just, you know, listens so well and advises so well. And, you know, I said to her, I just feel like I need to take a break. And with COVID, I haven't really left my lovely little island. I work from home, and I do feel pretty burned out. And now I've organised a little bit of travel this year, which is going to be lovely, just so lovely to just break that cycle a bit. And what's happened as a result of burning out like this, or feeling the exhaustion of all of this, is you kind of, I don't know, I'm sure your audience and you may relate to this, but there are days when you want to burn the house down. You literally I want to burn the house down, break, you know, get rid of my website, get rid of everything I do, you know, and just
Run for the hills.
Run for the hills. And my God, does it take resilience to breathe, to, you know, use those practices that you've practiced all your life, yoga, whatever it is, to just bring you back into centering and recognizing how you feel and honoring how you feel and allowing all of those different emotions. And what's particularly powerful at the moment is that we have moved into the photon belt. And this is so interesting astrologically, because in astrology, it divides our timing into sort of 22,000 years, and then splits that into 2 times 11,000 years, and then splits that into 2,000 year cycles. And only 2 of those 2,000 year cycles is called the photon belt. The rest is called galactic night. And the last photon belt was the age of Atlantis. And Atlantis burnt itself out through greed and excess. And what the photon belt means is a massive shedding of light on the planet. And this massive shedding of light is an opportunity to raise our vibration. So the earth is naturally raising, the universe, it's raising its vibration. We're either going with it or we're not. And we will go with it, but we could go with it kicking and screaming if we're toxic, eating junk, not listening to our higher self or inner self, and keeping those old patterns. We're going to be kicking and screaming through it. And some of us won't make it. Some of us will probably ascend over to the other side and carry on the other side. So this is such a massive time. I mean, this has been going on since 1985, moving from the age of Pisces, which is the guru-led time of the gurus, and you can sort me out, to the age of Aquarius, which is let's sort ourselves out and let's be our own inner gurus. So we're not really doing this alone right now. If we're going through perimenopause and we're in the photon belt, there's a massive shedding of what doesn't serve us and a massive introduction of what needs to happen. And this is where it was so powerful learning what I did with Barbara, of the understanding of the universal rhythms, that we are like little solar powered batteries. We think that we need to eat food for fuel. Only a third of our energy comes from food. 2/3 comes from light, from sunlight. And so, and anybody who's interested in that needs to look up Barbara Wren and read her books, but also Zach Bush. I mean, what a fantastic chap. And listening to him the other day and talking about, black holes and he links it all, the photon belt. So if we are these emissaries of light, it's about, creating that light. It's about becoming enlightened from within, but not just enlightened as a yogi would, but enlightened as in taking that light inside ourselves through the trapped chlorophyll in our vegetables, exposing ourselves in nature to sunlight, and clearing out our crap, basically, And so that's how it all links together. I find it so fascinating.
Wow.
It's a powerful time.
I mean, gosh, that was just like that. That felt like it just sort of suddenly this kind of like energy kind of rushed through what you were saying. It was really, really interesting listening to you there, and I love the kind of metaphor actually of that almost like perimenopause is in alignment with the photon belt, being those two experiences on a global, universal, and personal level. It just felt like there was quite a strong metaphor kind of showing up there. So, wow, gosh, I mean, what a wealth of threads and topics we've covered, Sophie. It's been gorgeous talking with you, and I would, please share with me. So some of those book titles that you'd recommend, share them with me, and I'll put them into the notes for anybody who is curious to understand more. And then there's one last question that I've got for you, and obviously I will also share how people can get in contact with you as well to sort of understand more about the work that you do with people. But there's one last question, which is, and something that I always ask my first time guests, which is, if you see this time in your life right now as a chapter in your own book of life, what would that chapter heading be called?
Ooh. A roller coaster.
And is there a subtitle that sits underneath that?
A journey back to yourself.
Oh.
And I really feel that once you can get through this piece, and I deliberately make it sound like that because it is full on. This is not for the faint-hearted. By the same token, welcome it, as Rumi says in the guest house, invite all of it in, all the different emotions and feelings, let it just rush through you. And remember, it's an invitation, and who you're going to become as a result of it. The leaders of the world, the leaders, the wisdom, in the traditional societies, Native American societies, for example, and communities, you know, the postmenopausal woman is the font of wisdom. And we have so much wisdom to share. And this is our time. This is our time to step up and to be the example to others that we so want to see, be the change that we see in the world. And this is our opportunity, and it's not easy, and we've got to fluff off all that stuff that we've, you know, accumulated over the years, but we have to trust we will get there. And we ought to do it with others. We really ought to do it. We ought to do it in community. We ought to do it through one-to-one coaching. I cannot recommend it enough. I mean, I seek it out on a regular basis to get that support. Somebody who can listen and hold the space, who doesn't tell you what to do, but allows you to speak from your soul and to find your own solutions. Of course, I will suggest a few strategies and techniques and, you know, help you to unpick the things that aren't working. But really, it's about, you know, what works for you and you coming up with your own solutions. And isn't that heavenly when you have someone who holds you, who doesn't judge you, who lets you speak from your heart, everything that's going on for you, and enables you to find your own solutions? We know what to do. Men know what they need to do. They need solitude to sort their solutions out. Women sort it out by talking. They need to talk it through. And we need to tell our partners, I don't need you to fix it, but I really need to talk about my day. And just get it off your chest and feel through that. So, yeah.
And I just to honour your own journey, Sophie, and this journey back to self, and you know, and to recognise all the things that you have gathered to you along your way that are clearly supporting you and supporting the people that you work with. So just to honour all of that and all of those teachers that we have around us who support us through the work that we do.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Sophie. Thank you so much. And yeah, I look forward to staying connected.
Oh, thank you so much, Ellie.
All right,
All
you
the
take
best.
care.
Bye.